mundahnya ngaku nya orang situ.
Sabar.
Maaf.
Okey.
Kalau yang ham tok nan tok bapak tu, nya sebenarnya what you see is what you get lah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I just want to ask, will you marry me then?
No.
No. Unmarried. Assalamualaikum, kembali lagi bersama dengan Ardin Belarek
Dan juga Azwa Sya dalam Borak Teh si Peng. Okey Den, itu kau nampak nervous Den.
Nervous.
Kenapa?
Sebab my mother tongue is not English, so my accent is really well.
Macamnya. Okey, hari tu kami dua akan tapi sebelumnya, kami dua nak ucap juga selamat Hari Sarawak kepada Sarawak people and Sarawakian.
Yeah, betul. Dan untuk meraihkan Hari Sarawak, kita nak bersama dengan seorang tetamu yang cukup istimewa, very special for Borak Teh si Peng. Sepanjang aku berada di dalam program tu.
And also very handsome guy.
Yeah, thank you.
Not you?
Oh, no me.
Iaitu Jason Brooke.
Yes.
Hi Jason Brooke, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
So, Mr. Jason, before we start, maybe you can introduce yourself to our audience.
Hai, saya Jason Brooke, saya penggara di Brooke Museums dan Yayasan Brooke. Saya cucu Raja Muda Anthony Brooke.
Wow. Boleh ke Sarawak? No, bahasa Melayu.
Jangan sampai aku lajak tu.
Jangan. So Jason, how long have you been in Sarawak basically?
I've been working in Sarawak for about 15 years, on and off, coming back every couple of months with our museums here. But of course, during COVID, for the past 2 years, I haven't been able to be here. But the team have been looking after everything on the ground. This is my first trip back now in 2 years since the pandemic.
After the
So
pandemic.
so just catching up on everything, seeing everyone.
Where do you live?
In England, actually. I'm now based at the First Raja James Brooke's house in Devon, which we just took over last year, where he retired, where he's buried, where all the church is covered in Iban Pakumbu and war memorials and these things connected to Sarawak. Down in Devon in the UK.
England.
In England,
Is it near with Chelsea Stadium?
Relative to Kuching, it's not so
I'm
far.
a Chelsea fan.
Well, you should come visit.
It's not related
definitely.
to our topic today. Okay, so basically how many museums you have Brooke?
So we look after 2 museums in Kuching. At Kubu Margarita, across the river, we have the Brooke Gallery. And that tells the story of Sarawak's historical journey as a nation state up to the Second World War, essentially. So that's the kind of story through the first 100 years of Sarawak's history as a state. And then we have the Rani Museum, where we're seated today, in the old courthouse. And that tells the story of the second Raja's wife, Rani Margaret, and how she immersed herself in Sarawak culture, particularly Sarawak's Malay culture. So we'll talk about that, I know, a bit later. So 2 permanent museums. In the Raja's house in Devon, we're also hoping to install a Sarawak museum there. So there'll be a little piece of Sarawak in the UK where people can come and learn about the culture here.
Interesting.
So, Mr. Jason, what are the new thing the new thing about you bring for the museum after the pandemic? Maybe there's any difference that you did?
Or new project?
Yeah, new project with this museum?
Yeah, we're looking at different ways that we can help people to interact with the museums in different ways. So digital technologies, apps, this sort of thing, where you can help to bring the exhibitions to life. We're actually looking at walking tours, so ways of connecting the museums by bringing people on a journey through the whole of Kuching and putting the museums in a kind of community context. So that's something we're looking at the moment.
Oh, basically what are the activity you provide in this museum? Is it just about the historical part, or you also provide any activity in here?
There's a few things, because the museum, of course, is telling the story of the Rani's journey becoming Sarawakian, coming here age 19 and immersing herself in the culture. So we talk about the Karingkam and the Sarawak traditional Malay textiles. But at both of our museums, we also have activities where Visitors, for example, can learn to speak phrases in all of the different languages of Sarawak, or they can learn to read and write Jawi. So it just helps to kind of immerse visitors in the cultural heritage behind the museums.
So basically banyak aktiviti yang dipolah dekat situ. Bukan aja bahasa sejarah, malahnya ada kita boleh belajar macam-macam bahasa di situ. And then juga ada apa?
Bacaan Jawi,
bahasa Jawi. Basically bahasa Jawi tu bukan orang Melayu atau apa belajar.
Bukan.
Yang semua boleh belajar.
Saya rasa saya kena ceramah gitu. Faham orang bah.
Okay, we talk about the Rani Margaret of Sarawak. Okay, basically kami basically interesting dengan Rene tu, dia seorang yang bijak, seorang yang mahir, dia memperkasakan lagi wanita. But first, Jason, can you talk more about the historical of Rani Margaret of Sarawak?
Sure, yeah. So the Rani was originally English French background, but she married the Raja when she was just 19 years old. And she gave up her life in England, she came to Sarawak, and what she was looking for was some new identity, like new place in the world. And so instead of having lots of English friends and things that were, could have gone on at the time, she befriended the wives and daughters of the Datus, so the members of the Council Negeri, the Malay members of the Council Negeri, and she began to adopt Malay culture. So she would wear the keringkam, the kebarung, the songkit. She learned to read and write Jawi. She learned Bahasa, of course, Sarawak. So she really became Sarawakian, and she was Rani and then Dowager Rani for I think 60, 70 years. It was a huge part of her identity. So her journey really is about finding her place in the world and finding a culture where she felt at home. That's what it's about.
Okay, Jason, for Hari Sarawak especially, did you have any program or project for Hari Sarawak?
Sure, yeah. Apart from the activities we talked about earlier, the big thing that we'll be launching on Hari Sarawak will be this historical walking tour. So we have our two museums on either side of the river, but in amongst all of that, you've got all of the heritage of Kuching. You've got Chinese main bazaar, you've got the old Indian sector, you've got the old Anglican cemetery, you've got the Malay kampungs, you've got all of this heritage of the city, and we want to connect people to it. So we're launching a walking tour from here at the courthouse, which will take visitors through all of these historic areas of Kuching, between the two sides of the river on the Tambang, and back here to the courthouse, which is the historic center of Kuching, all the measurements taken out from the courthouse. So we'll be launching that, a free walking tour for visitors, absolutely free. They just sign up and they will be taken through the history of Kuching.
So basically, how people can join this work?
So we'll put something on our website. So if you go to brookmuseums.org, there'll also be QR codes on posters and things around the courthouse, so you can go and scan them. But otherwise, if you go to the website, there will be a way of just pre-booking, and it's a free tour, but it's just to register so that we can have an idea of numbers that are coming.
Sebab dekat museum tu best. Bila masuk ke dalam museum tu, kita orang dah kena dapat nanggap macam-macam. Apa orang gelai tadi? Ada orang gelai gambar, dalam gambar.
Gambar-gambar bersejarah.
Yes, gambar-gambar
barang-barang bersejarah.
Dia ada penceritaan macam yang ada di belakang kami orang tu. Kita boleh nanggap lah. Di belakang tu ni ada cerita-cerita yang tertentu.
Betul.
Dekat situ lah kita boleh nanggap apa yang berlaku pada zaman Duluk Marik sampailah ianya dibina menjadi satu negeri yang digelar sebagai Sarawak.
Betul. Okay. We talk again about the Margaret. Okay, basically Margaret is married Charles, right? Married Charles, and after that, Charles. I'm very touched about this story where Charles give Margaret Astana, the Astana, right? So can you talk more about the Astana?
Astana.
Yes, the Astana.
The Astana is
wedding gift for Margaret.
That's right, in its sort of most recent form. That location was the I mean, it's an incredibly important historic location for Sarawak as a state because it was the seat of whoever was in government for a long, long time, even before Brooke times. The Brunei governor was there on that location. And so it had various incarnations, various houses that were there. But the one that was built that you recognize today as the Astana was built in 1869, just after Charles Brooke had married Margaret.
Yes.
And wanted a home that was suitable for her because she was giving up all of this life in England, and he wanted a welcoming home where she could come and raise a family. So it went from being a sort of seat of government to something more like a family home. And when you look at her photographs, she took lots of photographs.
Yes.
You know, it's the kids playing in the garden and on the
Yeah.
furniture and informal and stuff. So I think I think it's a kind of beautiful story of Charles trying to make his new young Rani who'd come over here feel like she could set up a home here in Sarawak.
That's true. Basically, Tok ceritanya memang romantik lah sebab
Jadi wedding gift dia. Aku
wedding
tahu
gift.
cerita.
Menarik.
Aku tahu.
Astana dekat belakang ya. Dan Astana adalah hadiah daripada Charles Brooke ke Margaret, kepada Margaret. Ialah salah satu hadiahnya lah. Okay, I have a last question for you, Jason. So what is your first impressions about Sarawak?
I think it's hospitality. I think coming here first time almost 15 years ago, I think what anyone will tell you, I hope anyone will tell you when they come here, is that it's an incredibly warm and welcoming place. People have such a deeply embedded cultural sense of hospitality, making visitors feel welcome, making each other feel welcome. So I think that's what people take away when they go here. You know, you learn about culture, you learn about heritage, you go to the jungle, but it's actually the people and the hospitality that I think makes the impression.
Okay.
Alright, so masa dah habis dah. Masa dah di penghujung segmen untuk bersama dengan Mr. Jason. Thank you so much. Belum habis lagi. Belum habis lagi.
Lepas tu, Mr. Jason akan gambar kita tour.
Mak kita lagi tua? Tua kah?
Kan tour ya.
Tua? Lagi kawan-kawan.
Kawan-kawan dalam museum tu.
So this is the beginning of the exhibition.
Okay.
Throughout the exhibition, we have all of the Rani's really special artifacts that we use to tell a story. So it's a story of the Rani first arriving in Sarawak and the legacy she leaves behind in Sarawak. And so we've broken it down into 6 key sections. And the first one that we're standing in here is just a bit about her background.
Okay.
So in Europe, growing up in France, growing up in England, searching all that while for some sense of identity, some sense of roots and belonging. And so these artifacts, these are her paintings from her time in France. These are pictures of her family and her childhood home. And here we're introduced to the Raja, Charles Brooke, who visits her and proposes marriage to her. So these first 2 sections are really about her childhood and this proposal of marriage, and then a decision to let go of her life in England and go to Sarawak on what would be the beginning of an adventure. And so we could go through maybe to the next theme, which is about her becoming Rani, it's called. It's about, it's about first impressions. It's about her decision at that time on arriving here in Sarawak, that instead of living amongst an English community, a European community, that she would become a local Rani.
Wow.
So she's trying to sort of understand, what does it mean to be Sarawakian? So she makes friends with the locals, invites them to tea. They are incredibly welcoming, hospitable. They want her to feel about local culture. So they begin to give her gifts of these garments. So the kabarung, this kabarung.
So this is it she made this?
It was made for her
For
by the
her.
local community.
Okay.
It was given to the Rani 140 years ago. And it's in beautiful condition. We have paintings and photographs of her wearing this. We know it was hers. And this was them sort of presenting their local culture, I suppose, to the Rani. And so she wore this kabarung. The Rani wore this songkit Sarawak, again in pristine condition, 140 years old. And of course, very famously, the Keringkam Sarawak. So this beautiful, exquisite, traditional Malay garment worn as a headscarf, or some of the larger ones worn as a shawl. And so the Rani would wear these, whether she was here or in England. She was very proud of this element of culture that she was adopting. And that was part of her signaling that she was becoming local. At this time, she also learned to read and write Jawi. She learned to speak Bahasa Sarawak. She arranged for some of the younger ladies to be taught to read and write in their own language as well, which is something that wasn't practiced at the time. So this was all about her finding a new identity, an identity that would define her as the Rani of Sarawak.
And all these things is meant for her.
All for her, by the local community.
Nak mengesahkan identiti sebagai orang Sarawak sebab ialah teknya datang daripada negara luar, datang pergi ke Sarawak lepasnya untuk menyesuaikan diri, untuk madah, no, aku orang situ. Mundahnya ngaku nya orang situ.
Sabar.
Maaf.
Okay, shall we go next?
Shall we go through to the next section?
Okay.
So this section we call the matriarch. And this is, matriarch, it's a mother figure. And we talk about her relationships with Sarawak, of course. She's, at the end of this sort of becoming Rani, she's established herself as this formidable figure where she's meeting the Queen of England and being treated with respect as the Rani of Sarawak. And so she's an important ambassador for Sarawak. And here it gets a little bit more personal. It's about being a matriarch, being the head of this Brooke family. And so we're introduced to the family tree, to her children. The Rani went through a lot of tragedy and challenges during her lifetime. And she actually lost 3 children at sea, very, very young age, while she was Rani, her first 3 children, and she had 1 stillborn child as well. And so it's a huge tragedy. And what she speaks about in terms of her experience of local people in Sarawak was that when she was going through all of these challenges, the local people gave her this comfort, this warmth, this love, and looked after her and supported her. And so she felt like she was being cared for. And this had a huge impact on her feelings of being Sarawakian. So this is her a bit more personal. We have my grandfather here as a young child. This is a sort of favorite grandson who was born in 1912. And Anthony, of course, went on to become the Raja Muda, the last member of the family, sort of actively ruling in Sarawak. We're looking at the Rani's artistic talents. So she was a writer, a poet, she was an artist, she was a photographer. She was actually quite a good photographer. She took these portraits of local people, her local friends. She was a great musician and a pianist. And the Rani actually composed in 1870 the first Sarawak national anthem. So we have a recording of this made in 1941. She had this huge artistic legacy in Sarawak. On this side here, we have some of the Rani's jewellery, which was inspired by her time in Sarawak, some of the motifs. And then this quite unique garment, we're not quite sure what to call it. We called it a Keringkam blouse, where the Rani has taken Sarawak Keringkam, this exquisite native textile, and she's combined it with a European style blouse and created a totally unique garment where she's bringing together, I suppose, the 2 cultures, you know, her background as a European and local cultural crafts. So it's quite a special garment as well. In this final section, we talk about legacy. There's of course her legacy in Sarawak when we speak of the textiles and education, but also her legacy in kind of paving the way for other members of the Brooke family, setting principles in place. So we introduce the Dayang Muda, who was the Rani's daughter-in-law, my great-grandfather's wife, my great-grandmother, and she also adopted local culture, dressed in these Malay garments. She actually converted to Islam. She was the only member of the family who became a Muslim. And she, and then the Rani's granddaughter-in-law, who was my grandmother, the Rani Muda, because she was a woman, the British didn't ban her from entering the country during the anti-cession movement. So it meant that this incredible woman would come to Sarawak in 1947-48 against the wishes of the British to fight against the British colonization of the country. And she traveled dressed as a Malay in these Malay garments with about 100 women, members of the Kaum Ibu, the women's movement, the mothers' movement, up and down the country as far as the Baram, representing Sarawak as an independent state in the face of this colonization. So we see that as part of the Rani's legacy. It was being willing to fully adopt Sarawak as your priority. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. And that's something that my grandmother did in 1947. So this is the Rani's legacy. We also encourage people to explore other parts of the legacy. So for example, Fort Margarita, which is named after Rani Margaret. She was known as Marguerite when she was a child. So the Brooke Gallery over at Fort Margarita, and of course the Astana and other parts of the legacy of the Rani around Sarawak.
Okay, terima kasih. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Jason.
very much. My
Thank
pleasure.
For your cooperation to share about this history for us as a Sarawakian. So guys, kita sebagai orang Sarawak, kita si pertahankan Sarawak siapa lagi. So jagalah nama Sarawak. Macam saya si pandai kakak Inggeris, tapi jangan malu sebab saya ada darah orang Sarawak.
Betul. Jadi kembali selepas tu.
OOHHAAA
11 Januari 2022, genap 5 tahun pemergian pemimpin kesayangan Sarawak Allahyarham Peng Sri Adenan Satim. Namun namanya masih lagi disebut-sebut sehingga kini, bukan sahaja di kalangan rakyat Sarawak tetapi juga di kalangan pemimpin luar. Terkenal dengan panggilan Tok Nan, jaga Sarawak Tok benar-benar.
Mila, well, you know why I want people of Sarawak to love Sarawak as I love Sarawak. Only if they love Sarawak, they will take good care of Sarawak and they will protect Sarawak. Itu adalah satu-satunya last word yang saya lekat ya, paling-paling saya terasa patutnya ada mada macam ya dengan kami, macam satu pesanan.
Kini kembali lagi bersama dengan Ardin Belarek dan juga
Azwa Sya dalam Borak Teh si Peng.
Yes, betul. Dan hari tu macam yang kita ada padah tadi sebelum tu, kita menyambut Hari Sarawak.
Betul.
Tadi dah
Sarawak.
beloya dengan Jason Brooke nak?
Oh, best boyangan.
Nak. Kali tu saya sih berdiam lagi. Kali tu saya penuh dengan tanya-tanya. Soalan yang akan diajukan kepada tetamu kita yang seterusnya untuk berkongsikan berkenaan dengan betapa istimewanya tentang Hari Sarawak.
Bukannya Jak, kami orang mau highlight apa nama teh? Permergian Allahyarham Penhin Sri Adenan Satim yang telah meninggal pada 11 Januari 2017.
Okey, dan untuk segmen kali itu kita bersama dengan yang berhormat Encik Azizul, merupakan ahli Dewan Undangan Negeri N3 Tanjung Datuk. Assalamualaikum yang berhormat.
Waalaikumsalam.
Apa khabar kita?
Sihat, alhamdulillah.
Kami dua tu siap dah bunyi serius gila. Kami dua tu beloya lebih.
Betul. So sebelumnya boleh kita perkenalkan diri kita dulu.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami Azizul Annuar bin Adenan, ahli Dewan Undangan Negeri bagi N3 Tanjung Datuk. Saya dilahirkan di Kuching, Sarawak dan dibesarkan juga di Kuching, Sarawak. Mendapat pendidikan awal di Sekolah Tunku Putra dan kemudiannya menyambung peringkat sekolah menengah di Putrajaya di Kuala Lumpur di Putrajaya dan menyambung lagi peringkat degree di Perth, Australia. Dan kemudian berusaha ada perniagaan sendiri dan sekarang ini menjadi ahli yang berhormat lah.
Yes. Okey, kita nak berbicara tentang macam ni kita boleh terlibat dalam bidang politik.
Okey, jadi semua kita tahu yang saya tok anak kepada Menteri Allahyarham Tok Nan kita. Jadi semasa saya lahir sememangnya nang udah ahli politik. Jadi apabila saya membesar dengannya semenjak umur saya masih kecil lagi memang selalu juga ngikutnya. Dan ini adalah satu kelebihan yang saya rasa tidak dapat kita cari di tempat-tempat lain. Saya puas nangganya pergi ke pedalaman-pedalaman negeri Sarawak, pergi ke tempat-tempat yang agak jauh dari kisah tu, sampai ke sempadan Indonesia pun pernah. Dan saya melihat memang banyak kata orang pembangunan, memang banyak lagi yang kita perlu bangunkan di Sarawak tu. Dan saya lihat, saya nanggalah dengan cara politik tu adalah satu cara yang kita dapat kata orang mengubah dasar ataupun kita plan for to make the state better, to make Sarawak a better place. Jadi at least sebelum saya tu kata orang meninggal dunia tu kita adalah mula sedikit perubahan ataupun kita mengubah kehidupan masyarakat di sekeliling kita lah.
Betul. That's why sampai hari tok lah jasa arwah Tok Nan dikenang.
Ya, betul. Dan nak nanya juga sebab pada masa kita sebelum bergelar sebagai yang berhormat, kita merupakan calon termuda. Tak asyik rasa macam aduh terbeban aku calon termuda tu. Masa saya lah. Walaupun benda tu dah lama dah berlalu, tapi kita recap balik. Macam ni yang berhormat.
Sememangnya memang ada rasa challenging sikit sebagai satu calon yang muda. Tetapi bagi saya usia tu bukan adalah satu penghalang lah. Yang saya lebih bingung masa saya adalah saya tu memikul tanggungjawab ada 3. Tanggungjawab pertama, Tanjung Datuk tu adalah satu kerusi yang dulunya adalah kerusi almarhum Tok Nan.
Betul.
Dan yang kedua, setelah Tok Nan yang dipegang oleh mak saya, Tok Amah Hajah Jamilah. Dan ketiga adalah satu kepercayaan seluruh pengundi lah di Tanjung Datuk ya. Jadi ada 4 kasut tu lah, kasut Tok Nan, kasut Tok Milah yang saya perlu isi. Dan ini bagi saya adalah satu tanggungjawab yang besar sebab kita tu mesti kata orang we have to rise to people's expectations lah. Sebab kita kira dari segi muda kini tu memang kita nangga banyak ahli politik muda-muda.
Betul. Sini nafikan.
Tapi adakah setidaknya dapat berfungsi dengan baik ataupun tidak? Sebab memang ada yang YB muda sememangnya dapat better performing dan yang sudah lebih berumur. Jadi umur tu bagi saya bukanlah adalah satu kata orang penghalang ataupun penanda aras lah.
Apakah perancangan untuk yang berhormat untuk di DUN?
Tempat kita di Tanjung Datuk.
Tanjung Datuk.
Jadi alhamdulillah kawasan saya Tanjung Datuk yang daripada Sampadi sampai ke Lunduk, sampai ke Sematan, sampai juga ke Teluk Melano Nun di mana adalah penghujung negeri Sarawak ataupun where Borneo begin lah. Orang selalu madah macamnya. Sememangnya tumpuan nombor 1 adalah dari segi pelancongan.
Betul.
Disebabkan kawasan dia memang sudah diberi kata orang anugerah daripada Tuhan dengan keindahan semula jadi yang ada. Sebab di Sia kami orang semua ada. Kami ada air terjun, kami ada apa kata orang sungai yang kacak, taman negara ada 5 taman negara di Sia. Ada pantai juga. Dan mungkin salah saya ataupun bagi saya sendiri, pantai-pantai di Tanjung Datuk adalah salah satu yang paling kacak di negeri Sarawak tu.
Betul.
Sebabnya masih kata orang belum juga di exploit benar gila lah. Masih belum dia. Tapi ialah salah satu tarikan dan pembangunan yang saya ingin bawa ke kawasan saya Tanjung Datuk adalah pelancongan. Dan yang kedua adalah dari segi pendidikan. Kalau kita lihat kini tu ada satu pusat latihan teknikal ataupun Sentex yang telah ditubuhkan, telah dibina, baru siap dibina dan sudah mula mengambil pelajar di Lunduk, dan sebanyak 900 lah, punya full capacity-nya ada 900 pelajar, dan ini bermacam-macam kursus, terutama sekali yang menuju ke arah hospitality dan sebagainya.
Ya, memang Sik dinafikan di area kita memang penuh dengan keindahan yang akan menjadi tumpuan kepada para pelancong. Lepasnya bila pelancong datang, of course tidak nak
Cari
bermalam,
cari tempat best.
Yes, makan,
Untuk bergambar and spend time dengan family.
Kita
sempat
goreng,
je?
ya Allah.
Yang mana?
Nak yang mana duit. Mun orang macam ada geng datang daripada negara sebelah lah, yang nyebut ketamnya kepinting. Kepinting.
Apa kepinting?
Kepinting ketam.
Oh, ketam.
Betul lah, betul.
Tahu.
Okey, so bila kita nak mengenang kembali dengan usaha yang ada dipolah oleh Allahyarham Tok Nan, maybe ada sesuatu daripada kita yang kita kenang sampai bila-bila dan menjadi teras kepada semangat untuk menjayakan, untuk memajukan tempat kita, meneruskan legasi yang ada diperjuangkan oleh Allahyarham Tok Nan. Silakan Yang Berhormat.
Saya selalu ingat pesan Allahyarham Tok Nan, ayahanda saya dengan saya, yang selalu dalam Masang Putih lah, yang selalu nyebut, if you want to do anything, you do it well. You must do your 100%, give your 100% effort in what you do. Even if you are the street sweeper, or even if you are the Chief Minister of Sarawak, or even if you are a YB, you must do it well. It means kita tak mesti kata orang really know what we are doing. We must know our subject matter and we have to perform our best no matter what we do lah. So yalah, kata orang, kata-kata yang saya pegang sampai hari tu lah daripada Tok Nan ya.
Sebab bila kita nanggai, bila kita recap balik, imbau balik zaman Allahyarham Tok Nan memegang tahta sebagai seorang ketua menteri masa dapat ditangganya adalah salah seorang yang lantang dalam bersuara. Antaranya kadar charge tarif kadar elektrik diturunkan, lepas
Tol dimansuhkan.
Yes, ya berasa ya. Nang best lah. Setiap hari ambil lalu Muhammad. Lalu sebenarnya pun saya tak faham lalu sia.
Mana pula kasihan.
Ulang alit sebab betul lah saya dah. Dulu bayar bah.
Betul. Sebelum tu kita tahu nak arwah Tok Nan seorang pemimpin yang disegani, jasanya dikenang sampai hari tu. Tapi mau tahu je macam ni pun personality di dekat rumah. Adakah berbeza ataupun sama aja?
Allahyarham Tok Nan, Tok Bapak tu nya sebenarnya what you see is what you get lah. Nya si ada kata orang personality di rumah ataupun personality di luar nya sama aja. Cuma yang mungkin kita lihat di luar adalah sifat penyayangnya dengan keluarganya lah, terutama sekali dengan cucu-cucunya dan semua sekali lah. Tok Nang kata orang sayang menang dengan cucunya lah. Jadinya cucu pun boleh salah lah. Biasa macamnya lah. Dan dengan kami anak-anak tu memangnya macam-macam lah, beri pesanan. Munnya ada masa lapang, selalu ngembak kami pergi ngail, pergi berjalan-jalan. Kadang-kadang kami ujung minggunya bilanya saya ada program lah, saya ada program papa, nyampun lah driving kawan-kawan aja, masang lagunya, macamnya lah.
Lagu apa lagu favourite?
Lagu biasalah, lagu Elvis Presley. Memangnya pun favourite lah ya.
Okey, Mbak kata Yang Berhormat tadi, dialah di rumah kami orang siap nangga macam ni. Caranya beri kasih sayang kepada anak-anak, cucu-cucu. Tapi kami orang dapat nangga benda ya apabilanya memperjuangkan nama negeri Sarawak. Siapa boleh sentuh Sarawak? Agaknya dulu.
OOHHAAA sampai hari tu orang makai.
Nak you pergi rumah. Sebab bila dengarnya speech, bila dengarnya dalam event-event yang tertentu, kita tertarik untuk dengar dari A sampai Z.
Betul. Kita nang macam ni orang madah.
Kita beri
jadi
tumpuan.
salah satu inspirasi orang sedikit itu lah.
Ya.
Sifatnya pun sifat kepimpinan, kasih sayangnya terhadap orang Sarawak untuk bangkit lagi hak bumi putera kita.
Okay, so kita dah berada di penghujungnya. Sebelum kita nak tutup tu, maybe Yang Berhormat ada sesuatu yang nak diberkatakan bersempena dengan Hari Sarawak.
Ya, kepada semua rakyat Sarawak, kita hendaklah kata orang mengenang kembali perjuangan rakyat kita dulu demi mencapai apa yang kita ada pada hari itu. Apa yang kita ada pada hari itu adalah hasil perjuangan bapa-bapa, nenek-nenek kita dulu untuk mendapatkan kata orang bukan kemerdekaan, tetapi apa yang kita ada lah pada hari itu. Dan Sarawak hari ini adalah kerana siapa yang telah membangun negeri Sarawak yang pada masa yang lepas. Jadi dengan kita sebagai rakyat Sarawak hendaklah menyayangi negeri kita ini, dan dengan kita menyayangi negeri kita ini, cara kita dapat menjaga negeri kita tu. Jadi selamat Hari Sarawak. Kita sayang Sarawak, jaga Sarawak, into Sarawak. Terima kasih.
Ya.
Betul.
Terima kasih kita nak ucapkan kepada Yang Berhormat kerana telah bersudi untuk bersama dengan orang.
Betul.
Actually sebenarnya banyak lagi yang kita dua nak sebut.
Betul.
Tentang perjuangan yang ada diperjuangkan oleh Allahyarham Tok Nan. Tetapi masa kita begitu singkat sekali. Tapi siapa apapun ada sedikit sebanyak yang boleh dikongsikan.
Betul.
Yang ada dikongsikan oleh Yang Berhormat tadi, harap ianya boleh dijadikan sebagai pedoman untuk kita jaga Sarawak. Bukan kita, siapa lagi.
Betul.